It's probably not a big surprise to most of you in here if I were to say that men aren't very good listeners. Yeah. See, what do you say? Yeah. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Some support from the back there. Men are not very good listeners, or at least that's how we're pegged, right? I mean, isn't that true? Isn't that like the most common complaint among wives? My husband just never listens to me, right? Yeah, we know that. I mean, it's a common trope in American sitcoms. If you watch, any TV, that comes up a lot. There's a reason it's called selective hearing. It's because selectively we don't want to listen to other people, right? I mean, and the truth is we all do this. I think we all fall prey to it. And I think if we were to be honest, and I went around the room and asked each and every single male and female in this room, if you have selective hearing at times, you're probably going to say yes, right? We all, I think, fall prey to this. But selective hearing doesn't just happen when I'm supposed to be hearing my wife, although that does actually happen to me as well. Selective hearing also affects me when I'm supposed to hear what my children are trying to say to me. Sometimes I'm not very good at listening. I try not to selectively hear what they're saying, but they say so much. They just say so much. It's hard to take it all in sometimes. And there are moments when I just need to shut my ears off, right? I need to bring my brain down and just not take it in anymore. I get lost in my own thoughts in the book I'm reading or the show I'm watching or the game I'm playing, whatever it is. So I confess before you this morning, this is me humbly confessing, that my attention is not what it should be. Okay, got that out of the way. One of the great truths of the story, though, this morning is that we have a God who doesn't have a short attention span. We have a God who doesn't selectively hear. We have a God who is paying attention to our needs and to our voices. And it doesn't seem like that all the time, right? At least not to us. But we have a God who is attentive. And I want to pick up on that theme here in a little bit after we read from Exodus chapters 1, 2, and 3. As you can see up on the screen, I've been very selective. We're going to jump around a lot, but that's on purpose because if I read it all, that's literally all I would have time to do, okay? So we're going to start in chapter 1, verse 6. Let's read together from the word of the Lord. In time, Joseph and all his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt, who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, it sounds like I'm off my own now. Cool. We're just having all sorts of troubles. I'm going to speak loudly and just hope that you can hear me. Or unless maybe we've got a duck out here. This is what happens sometimes, right? Here, I'm going to let you do it. I'm going to do it wrong. I'll do it. Hello. Okay, back on. We're good now? All right, wonderful. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks, and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. Why have you done this? He demanded. Why have you allowed the boys to live? I want to leave that story right there and jump to chapter 2, starting in verse 1. About this time, a man and woman came from the tribe of Levi and got married. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket, made of papyrus reeds, and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen to him. Soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This must be one of the Hebrew children, she said. Then in verse 10, later, when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. The princess named him Moses, for she explained, I lifted him out of the water. I'll jump down to verses 21 through 25. Moses accepted the invitation, and that is the invitation by this Reuel to come and stay with him. And he settled there with him. In time, Reuel gave Moses his daughter Zipporah to be his wife. Later, she gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, for he explained, I have been a foreigner in a foreign land. Years passed, and the king of Egypt died. But the Israelites continued to groan under their burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He looked down on the people of Israel and knew it was time to act. One day, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. That seems appropriate. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. Then down in verse 13, Moses protested. If I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they're surely going to ask, what is his name? Then what am I supposed to tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to remember for all generations. I want to stop there. Of course, there's a lot more that we could read and cover, but I think this is enough for one day. Today, I want to talk about God's name being revealed. This is the name Yahweh, His eternal name, His name that will last forever, he says. But there are also three other important names that I want to touch on here for a moment. Again, another remarkable story that we find here in the Old Testament. And we didn't read the first 5 verses of chapter 1, but if we had, you would have seen that the sons of Israel were listed there. Jacob's sons are all listed in the first 5 verses. Now, why is that? Well, because Exodus is picking up right where Genesis left off, right? And Genesis leaves off with the 12 sons of Israel and Jacob himself heading down to Egypt so that they can survive through the dreadful famine that had hit the land. And each of these 12 names are incredibly important to the Israelites, right? They're way more important than they are to us. I mean, who cares about Zebulun, right? Really. I mean, for us, who really cares about Gad and Naphtali and, all these people? What do they matter to us? Well, to the Israelites, of course, these names are identification, right? It's like carrying around your driver's license and, hey, you're from Connecticut. Oh, hey, this is somebody from New York, or hey, there's somebody from Texas, or whatever, right? It's an identification. This is who you belong to. So this tells you who your family is. This tells you where you're supposed to live. There's a lot communicated in those 12 names. So you'd imagine that the next names to be mentioned in Exodus would be equally important, right? These 12 names aren't throwaway names. They're not unimportant. They're very, very important to Exodus and beyond. So whose name must be next? Clearly, it's got to be Moses, isn't it? Because Moses is the guy of Exodus, and really, for the whole story to come, all the way through Deuteronomy, it's all about Moses. So Moses' name must come up next, right? Wrong. It's not Moses. Moses' name is not mentioned next, although that would be a really good guess. Okay, so it's got to be the king of Egypt, right? I remember, as Adam was reading, it said the king of Egypt. It has to be the Pharaoh. That's whose name is mentioned. Wrong. Pharaoh's name is never mentioned. We don't know which Pharaoh is in power at this time. So who are these? What is the next important name that gets mentioned? The next people to be named in Exodus are actually 2 Hebrew women. You see, the midwives are the next 2 people to be named, Shiphrah and Puah. I want you to remember their names this morning. You know, those amazing women who refuse to follow through on Pharaoh's order, right? They stand up to him in the face of their own demise, most likely, because of disobeying him. They even lie on behalf of saving the lives of those Hebrew boys. I think it's incredibly significant that Shiphrah and Puah are the next 2 names that we read about in Exodus. The names of these women have lived on for millennia now. They carry a lot of weight. Their bravery, their fortitude, their ethical fortitude in the face of what they had to choose is incredible to me. These are 2 women to be admired and to be looked up to. The final name I want to spend a brief moment on, of course, is Moses's. And of course, he is obviously a very important person. Moses is known the world over, right? Not just in Christian circles, but obviously in the Jewish faith, but also in the Muslim faith. But even people who don't believe know the name of Moses and know how important, at least, he was to all of these different religious people. But why? Why is Moses so important? Well, of course, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the fathers of the Israelites, right? The great patriarchs. But Moses, rather, becomes really the father of faith to the Israelites. As he is the one who was allowed to approach God in a special way that the other Israelites are not allowed to. He was raised as an Egyptian, right? Not just as an Egyptian, but in literally the wealthiest and most powerful house in Egypt. But his true origin, of course, is that of an Israelite, right? And so there's this identity crisis in Moses that comes to a point. He's sort of an enigma. And that fact bears itself out in the course of the story as he believes that he's doing the right thing by helping this Hebrew who gets attacked, right, by the slaveholder. But he quickly realizes that he's not trusted. He's not respected amongst his own people, even. So what does he do? He runs away. So we find him in this story out in no man's land, literally. He gets taken in, he gets welcomed into Reuel's house, where he then has his own family. While the names, of these three people don't just live on, what's amazing about each of them is how they responded to the chances that they were given by God. See, they came to a moment where they could be faithful or not. They came to a moment where they had to make a choice. Is the way I'm going to live, is who I'm going to be the way that God wants me to live and to be? Or am I going to choose different from that? Each of them, Shiphrah and Puah and Moses, all chose to be faithful to God. Now, I would guess not all the time in their lives, and in fact we know that Moses wasn't faithful all the time in his life. But here in this moment, he is. We may never have the opportunity to confront a wicked king. My guess is most of us probably won't. But perhaps God is providing other opportunities for us to show our faithfulness. Maybe God is arranging other things for us to do to show our commitment to His ways and not to the ways of the world. I do also want to talk about this idea that God is attentive to us. The Lord is listening. I joked earlier about the fact that I'm a selective listener, because of course I'm not. Except I am. But that isn't true of the Lord, right? God is not a selective listener. And this story goes out of its way to tell us that truth. Near the end of chapter 2, we read that the cry of the Israelites made its way to God. We're told that God heard their cry and decided that the time was now right to act. What's really fascinating to me about the way their cry is phrased in Hebrew is actually that we're not told that they cried out to God. We're simply told that they cried out. All we know is that they're in pain, they're hurting, and they're crying out to someone, anyone, to give them relief. It's quite possible that after 400 years, they had given up hope that God cared about them any longer, and that their crying out is actually crying out to Egyptian gods and goddesses, right? It's possible that they're not crying out to the Lord at all. But who hears them? The Lord hears them, because they're waiting for anybody to respond. And so God does respond to their situation, first by listening to them. I'm sure each and every one of us have had a moment in our lives where we've needed somebody to listen to us, to hear what's going on in our lives, not to do something about it necessarily, but just to hear what's on our hearts. One of the great differences between the Lord and whoever it is that listened to us, or even perhaps maybe we were the listener, but the great difference is God has the power to act on that situation. I may not, if somebody comes to me and I listen to them, I may not have the power to fix what's going on in their life. I can listen. God can do both. And so He does. He listens and then He acts in this moment. And so we're told in Exodus here that God was mindful of, that He remembered His covenant with Israel. And I don't think we're actually being told here that God somehow forgot and then all of a sudden, oh yeah, that's right, I had this whole covenant thing worked out with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I better follow through on that. I don't think that's what is going on. I don't think God ever forgot about His covenant. But He chooses now. He chooses now to act on it, because everything is about to change for the Israelites. So, of course, how did God choose to rescue them? Well, He focused His attention on Moses. Moses, man, as we've already stated, who was very conflicted in his own life. He would need to overcome his own upbringing, his own connection to Egyptian society before he could make any real difference in the lives of the Israelites. And what's even more remarkable to me is how the Lord chose to get Moses' attention. He decided to set a bush on fire. That's how God chose to get Moses' attention. to set a bush on fire. But it didn't actually burn up, right? So as Moses is out for his typical day of shepherding, most likely wandering in this land a whole bunch, probably passed by this exact same place day after day after day as he grazed the flock, as he took them to water. Something was different this day. I wonder how the course of history might have changed if Moses had seen that burning bush and thought, that's a little too weird. I think I'm going to go that way. Right? What if in that moment he had not decided to be curious about the bush, but instead freaked out by it and said, that's not for me. This whole burning bush thing is not my thing. But he does, right? That curiosity overcomes him. He's amazed at what happens. So he goes up to it. And one of the ways of reading the story that has touched me in the past few years is a Jewish way of reading the story. And that is that in this moment, the bush doesn't just spontaneously combust and catch on fire, but rather that the bush has been burning for a really long time. And it's only now that Moses chooses to see. See, the burden then falls on Moses, not on God. That Moses has been failing to see that God is right there all along. And so finally, this one day, he wakes up and he realizes, hey, there's a burning bush. But the truth is that bush was burning, waiting for it to be seen by him so that he could respond to it and do what God wanted him to do. I really like that way of seeing it because Moses is human. And I wonder how many of us each and every day fail to see the moments, the opportunities that God is putting right before us that we need to see. How many of us are walking by those burning bushes every day, not paying attention to them because we're too focused on our work, right? Moses had too much to do with the flock. He didn't have time to worry about that bush on other days. How many of us are too busy with our work that we can't see what God is doing? How many of us are too busy with other things in our lives, with family, with, I got to go here, I got to do that? We're failing to see those burning bush moments right before us. We don't know why it took him so long to see, but he does in this moment, and he's ready to respond to God's call. So then we have this great reveal of the name of the Lord. I want to close by focusing here this morning. You know, for the past several weeks, we focused on the different names. And even this morning, we've talked about a few names, Shiphrah and Puah and Moses. But of course, we focused on Isaac and Israel these past few weeks as well. No name is more important, or really, quite frankly, more strange than the name of the Lord, at least in Hebrew. See, the name Yahweh is closely related to the Hebrew verb to be, the verb of being. Now, just like in English, the verb to be is what we call an irregular verb. Everybody knows what an irregular verb is, right? That as you just Dan's in the back going, oh yeah, I know what an irregular verb is. Yeah, sure, Okay, fine. A quick, brief explanation. An irregular verb is one that whatever tense you put it into, it changes its form. So if you think about the verb of being, you want to talk about something in the past, how do you say that? I was doing something, or he was, or she was, or they were. But if you talk about something now, how does it sound? I am, or he is. Well, those don't sound anything alike, right? They're not related at all. It's irregular. Or if you talk about something in the future, I am going to do something, or I will do something. Again, those sound nothing alike. So it is an irregular verb in English. It's also an irregular verb in Hebrew, and quite frankly, in every language I've ever studied, I would imagine in Italian as well, it's an irregular verb. The verb of being is a funny little word, and it is in Hebrew as well. And it's really strange to me that God, strange and fascinating all at the same time. It's really strange that God uses this as God's name. This is the name that God takes for himself. It's unique. Right? It's unique to the one who bears it. Only God is worthy of this name. He is who he is, and he will be who He will be. And that's precisely what His name communicates to us. I have to imagine that this name probably brought comfort to Moses, even though Moses is resisting, this call to go back to Egypt. Maybe Moses expected, and I would probably say this is true, Moses probably expected God to say, my name is warrior, right? My name is fighter. My name is destroyer of the Egyptians, right? That's what Moses was probably holding out hope for. That God in some way was going to stand up in this moment and say, I am mighty and powerful. And if you follow me, they're going down. Instead, God says, I am. Oh, okay. All right, God. But again, I like it, and I think Moses probably liked it because what it communicates is that God will be whoever He needs to be for His people. Yahweh is a God who will be with us. So God will be with them. Jesus ends His time on earth with His disciples saying what? Remember, I will be with you always. God communicates that here to Moses as well. I will be with you. It's a powerful statement. And God's name is linked in with that. He is God, and He will be who we need Him to be. Not that we can change God, but that God adapts to work with us and to help us. The other way I like to think about the name of God is as a prayer. Again, this is an ancient Jewish practice that a lot of Christians have picked up. So if you think about the name Yahweh, it sounds like a breath. Yahweh. And so you can breathe in Yahweh. Yahweh. And so there's a breath prayer that a lot of Jews and a lot of Christians actually do on a daily basis, where they'll spend a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes in prayer, and with each breath that they take, they breathe the name Yahweh. What a powerful practice. To remember God's name in that way, to let it become our own breath, right? And if you think back to Genesis chapter 2, how did God create humanity? By breathing into them. So we draw our very breath from Yahweh. As we breathe out that same breath. It's a really powerful way of thinking about the name of God. So if you're looking for a new way to kind of pray, try that. Spend some time praying the name of God over and over again and see if God's name doesn't stick in your brain a little bit. The name Yahweh, for us, it is a powerful name. It says a lot to us. It means a lot to us. I want to end. I like the way that Proverbs 18:10 lays out. The name of the Lord is a strong... Everybody knows this. Come on. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. And anybody know how it ends? Whoever runs to it will be safe. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. And those who run to it will be safe. There's power in the name of the Lord. So we end our little mini-series here in the Old Testament talking about names. We're going to move to something different next week, and I'll reveal that as we get into Deuteronomy chapters 5 and 6. We couldn't end in a more perfect place by talking about names than the name of the Lord, Yahweh, which carries so much power for us. I want to end today with just a couple of concluding things. The first is, think back here a few minutes ago, are we seizing the opportunities that God is placing before us? Moses, again, had been ignoring the burning bush until one day he didn't. And now he's taking that moment to do what God is calling him to do. Are we seizing the opportunities that God is placing before us? Or are we letting them pass us by? And then the second thing is, how is God responding to the needs of His people today? Where do you see God active and at work? Are the cries of God's people reaching Him? And if so, in what ways is God responding? How do you see the Lord at work. A couple of things I want to leave you with, okay? There's good news in the Old Testament. There's gospel in the Old Testament. The name of Yahweh should be on our lips, be on our hearts, be in our minds. As we go through each and every day, let us think about the name of the Lord, run to it, and know that we are safe. This morning, if you need to run to the name of the Lord, you can do that. We're going to have a time where we stand and sing, where we welcome you to bring your cares, your burdens, your concerns, your thanksgivings to God. Run to the name of the Lord and be safe this morning as we stand and sing.